Look, I've never asked this question, we know each other pretty well, but what was it like the first time you walked into the head office of the CBA as their CEO? What did you think? Because you started from the bottom and worked your way up, didn't you?
My brother has a saying for that: fear, terror, abject horror.
So when did you get the top job?
In 1992.
Oh, okay. It was also at a time when that bane of your life then, John Simon, came along the scene, these lower interest rates and things. That must have been a real challenge for you at that time, because the banks had never been challenged in that kind of space, had they?
One of the things that was evident to me at that time was the distortion of margins in deposit taking and lending that were a hangover of the regulated days. Right. And I knew from that the margins on home loans were very high. And that not just the broking industry, but broking with origination, remember the securitisation of loans, that was moving in as a serious competitor. The response really was to get honest about the margins. And you remember in 1996, we dropped our margins by 130 basis points in 2 moves without any change in monetary policy.
It's the day I learned to love you, David. The day I learned to love you. Now, you must have also had some interesting and colourful conversations with Paul Keating over that time, because if any guy would have been interested in the deregulation and the activity of the biggest bank would have been Paul Keating, and you being at the CBA. Did you have some colourful conversations with Mr. Keating?
Well, it's impossible not to, but there's a remarkable mind that goes with a way of talking that engages people, a bit like yourself, Peter.
Oh, thanks very much. Now, tell me, one of the innovations you brought along was ComSec, and of course my colleague here, Paul Rickard, reckons you gave him a packet of pencils and a few notepads and a fax machine and said, away you go. Is that true story, or is he an apocryphal one?
It's pretty right, because...
No, I'm not surprised.
It's pretty right, because I always felt that in large organisations, and banks in particular, the established IT departments have both a lot to do and a lot of process on their plate, but they also get captured a little bit by vendors, and they tend to be quite slow doing things. So ComSec was the first time we said to another group of people, you just do it.
Are you disappointed about what major banks have done to see them rolled into a Royal Commission?
Well, it's a big question. There's no doubt since the financial crisis that the banks in general have not been adept at presenting publicly what's going on, how they operate, and how the value that they add to the community in their basic roles. The other issue for me comes back to their governance. We know that bank boards, each board meeting, are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of material. Yet this doesn't seem to have changed anything. Let's assume that you and I start a vacuum cleaner business. And very simple, we sell door to door and we employ salespeople on commission only to sell vacuum cleaners, and it's $10 a vacuum cleaner. Sounds pretty simple. Do we need a system of controls around that sales force? Well, you'd think not. It's pretty obvious whether you sell a vacuum cleaner or not. But what if you get the local newspaper says, well, your vacuum cleaner company finished up selling 10 vacuum cleaners to an old lady with Alzheimer's disease. Is that not embarrassing for you publicly?
Yeah.
What controls did you have on your sales force? Is a straight $10 commission no matter what appropriate? So the issue inside these organisations is, how are the processes established, how are the control systems established, and how are those control systems are reviewed, including the process up to the board.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that if you add up all the mistakes that banks might have made and you work out what they might have needed to pay to rectify it, it'll still be less than the amount of advertising they've had to do to try and rebuild the brand after rubbishing their brand.
But you can't advertise your way out of reputational problems. But you're possibly quite right.
One last question to you. The Royal Commission, the banks are being hauled through the public trial of their performance in the past. Do you think the banks are going to be a good buy once the Royal Commission's over, or do you think they'll suffer for some time, share price-wise? And I know it's a guess, but what's your feeling?
They'll suffer for a time while this is going on and while people are unclear about what redress the Royal Commission decides to put in the law in future. And what I'd be looking for is how the Commission thinks about the responsibility in lending in particular. Is a loan the responsibility of the borrower or the lender? And if the Commission tends towards the responsibility of the lender, the banks and the system have got quite serious issues.
I said one was the last question, but I just thought of this as I was listening to your answer. I've often written that I just thought that there should have been like a banking consumer claims tribunal where there was an objective arbitrator where someone could come and say, this is what the bank's done, and the arbitrator could say, no, in this case it was your fault, the bank hasn't done anything wrong, go away. Would that have been a better system rather than the banking ombudsman, which always seemed like a bit like a, you know, they're paying lip service to helping people?
Yeah, well, the banking ombudsman was set up back in my time, and I always thought it had been pretty effective. There are fantastic statistics come out of that system. But if you think about these other sort of tribunals or groups that do this work, why, if the industry does a good job, do we have to add that layer of cost and complexity so people get a reasonable deal?
Yeah.
And if you consider, if you look at the transcripts from last Friday from the Commission, you know, one area of misconduct, 12 or more sightings by the council assisting on breaches of law. There are that many laws that have been breached. Is that going to be solved by another tribunal, or how does this thing get sorted out? That's the challenge now for the Commissioner.
Do you think our banking system will be better as a consequence of the Royal Commission?
I don't know yet, but in credit, you must have certainty of contract. You must have certainty in bankruptcy law for any financial system to operate properly. And you can't have a system like in the United States, where in many states over there, you don't want to pay your home loan back, so you give the keys to the bank. Well, that's not an adequate system for credit.
Okay. Well, I really wanted to get deep and close and personal with you, David, but we always talk about banking and stuff like that. Thanks for coming on the program.
Pleasure, Peter.
That's David Murray, of course, and he's had coffee with Switzer.